Post cat. So the story so far. So when I left cat, I attended UCLA.
As I reflect on my own practice, I could have done better. And I think as we talk about systemically what education can do better, um,
I know that sounds
it's not
bad,
an
but it
easy
was kind
problem
of
to
like,
solve.
all right,
It's not an easy problem to
what are
fix.
the things that I can spend my mental energy on to prevent myself from uh from falling further down? It was at that point I didn't really think of it as growth. I was being put through the grinder as compared to being put into the soil to grow.
Um,
So I
to
think that
use my channel to tell more first generation college student stories. Where
right.
did your dad, you said he's an immigrant from where?
So he's an immigrant from the Philippines.
Okay.
The Filipino side of my family. So I mixed Filipino and
In
Chinese.
addition to sociology, social media, well, maybe not in addition to, social media is a big part in the equation. Did you guys talk?
Yes, I certainly agree with your statement there that there's um, some people's ability to explain something has eroded in that some if you're using Facebook, you can just post a picture of what
Schools are
this
bad at
is,
measuring,
right?
which is
Or you
confrontation,
can
which is giving and receiving feedback, standing in front of an audience, just being comfortable with who you are, um, knowing who you are, and also like this multicultural thing, like meeting somebody that comes from a different background and wanting to learn about that background.
endless cycle of everybody trying to kill each other through words. And I'm just like, I don't have the mental capacity for that.
And it's dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And we've, I think, when we're not careful, we start to forget who somebody is, what their experiences are, what their background is, and we see them for what they believe or how they vote or something like that. And I think that a little bit is unfortunate, toxic, maybe.
Yeah. I was born in 1996, but I seem to both act uh like an old man from the 70s and also like like a modern hip kid or something in a mix of the two.
This is kind of an interesting project for me to reflect on my own experience at CAT and create something that maybe other people want to watch and hear about my former students. I find it kind of an interesting time and place to be able to connect through Zoom that we didn't used to be able to before. So you were my student, you graduated in 2014. I think we just recounted. How's your post-CAT life been like?
Post cat. So the story so far. So when I left cat, I attended UCLA under the guise of business economics. It's mostly to appease like my dad. He was essentially the equivalent of my bean counter, so to speak. But in doing that, I had no idea what that meant uh, moving forwards in terms of like what classes I would need to take, what I would actually do with that thing, this this business economics degree outside of college. So to start, what I had done is take essentially some remedial classes. So in the year when I was taking your class was pre-calculus, I believe, right?
That's
Um,
right.
I what I did was sign up for a pre-calculus course in my first quarter at UCLA. Um, that was one of my three classes. I decided, okay, I'm going to take this easy because I have no idea what I'm going into. Um, the other classes were, I think there was an English, like an English composition, kind of like a writing class, and then something that seemed kind of interesting to me at the time, which was a communication studies class, um, media and such. Uh, and so when I was taking this pre-calculus course in UCLA, I was like I was just hit in the face with so many things, both on the topic of calculus as a course of study, and also like just the amount of workflow and the expectations and all these sorts of things that I feel like my experience at CAT did not prepare me for. I was thinking it in comparison to, at the time, Lowell High School. If you had gone to Lowell, the things I heard was it was like the expectations were much higher. You had more homework, uh, you had more of a traditional type of grading structure. You have homework assignments, and then you have like a final or something. It was rarely like how it was in CAT. In CAT, I believe it was primarily smaller assignments leading up to the presentation of said topic that you've been studying for the last month or so. And especially throughout all of my experience at CAT, I was under the impression that that is what college is like. That you would be doing smaller things that you can kind of fiddle around with, and not necessarily have like those perfect scores on, but then be able to explain your understanding of said topic in front of a group of people. So UCLA was nothing like that. It was definitely homework, midterm, homework, final. And you were put through the grinder. You had 10 weeks to do the entire course. You had to make every class. Attendance became a reasonable amount of your grade, which makes sense, of course. I respect the people who are instructing me, so I would go to every course or every class. But it was just so much stuff, so many things. And so at the end of that quarter, I scraped through by the skin of my teeth with a 1.8 GPA.
Wow.
It was certainly like I went from like being like, all right, maybe I can maybe I can get it felt like in the, let's say, in the realm of sports, because I feel like I vaguely recall you being relatively into like baseball, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. It's the equivalent of like uh it's the equivalent of like, oh, I'm gonna go sign up with, like, I don't know, the Giants, right? Oh, I have all these credentials and scores, and like, my technique I think is pretty good. And then all of a sudden you actually go and experience what that's like, and then it's like, not only are they dissatisfied with you, what ended up happening is a total mindset shift for me. It became uh you know it went from like, all right, these are my ambitions, to, all right, this is damage control. This is what this week's issues are. you know, it was a complete 180 switch for me. And like, I feel like that quarter and the rest of that year taught me to not ever be disappointed by your own results, even if, like, to not let those results sway you from just giving it everything to get to the next day, because that's kind of
Yeah,
how it felt. That's kind of how it felt. Yeah.
that is, I mean, I appreciate you bringing that to the table. I think it's a lot easier to just kind of sweep your criticism under the rug. And what you're saying is very real. It's something that I struggled with. Like I was aware that in my math class, I was not preparing students to get to. I knew they were in for a shock when they got to college, and I think it's as I reflect on my own practice, I could have done better. And I think as we talk about systemically what education can do better, it's not an easy problem to solve. It's not an easy problem to fix. I think you're, you're one of the top students at CAT, right? So like the way that dynamic worked for kids in the middle or kids at the bottom, was worse. They suffered worse outcomes. And I think it is very much, like if I were to say, when you get to the root of all these things, you're looking at disparity in opportunities, and that roughly correlates with money and income, and if you look at who's in those neighborhoods, it tends to be students of color. And so this kind of like when we talk about, I think, systemic racism, it is issues like this that are really difficult. And I think with the two high schools that I taught at, one was called Youth Empowerment School in Oakland, and the other was City Arts and Tech, CAT, which you went to in San Francisco. We both did a really good job on the relationships piece, I think. Like overall, like our teachers built good relationships with our students, and our students like kind of helped psychologically our students see themselves as successful and grow. But what we may not have done as well as we could have is prepared you for the rigor of a four-year university. Would you agree with that?
I certainly agree with that. I think that see, it was almost like so at the time when I realized the disparity, when I was already, ankle deep in college and didn't have the means to just drop out and to justify that. When I was in there, it felt like deception, and it was not an intentional deception. It was almost like it was an afterthought. It was kind of like I had been prepared for college by people who had not gone to college. As heinous as that sounds, it was almost like just the formatting of the curriculum, in terms of, like you said, how rigorous the curriculum is. And I feel like at the time it was certainly like, oh yeah, this school did not prepare me. I was like, how the hell could I have possibly gotten a 4.0 when I didn't even do every single homework assignment willingly? Like, that is something I will concede. I did not do all of the homework assignments for all of the classes when I was at CAT, because after a while I realized that there is a system where if you do extremely well on the heavily weighted assignment, which would be like your presentation or something, that you can then just kind of spare your own physical labor and also mental willpower, to prepare for that instead, to make your life a little bit easier. AKA, you don't do homework, you ace the test, then jobs are good and it doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
That's that was what my mindset was. And I was like, after a while, I was kind of thinking like, this is too good to be true. What's the catch? Why am I getting a 4.0 when I'm not doing all the homework? But I wasn't really doing anything about it because it was benefiting me. I didn't really feel the need to think twice about it, since I didn't know the looming reality, could say like 2 years later. So, yeah, I kind of forget where we were going with that.
Well, I mean, I want to go a little more into that. I mean, I think perhaps if that situation is happening again, perhaps, we could at least tell you when you graduate, by the way, you're in for a shock, because we know that the expectations and, like fixing that gap is a gigantic problem. Now that I teach in Pleasanton, I can see why there is no easy way to get the student that graduates from CAT ready to compete with the kids that go to school in Pleasanton. Like, the amount of resources they have there, it's like the disparity is enormous, and private tutors kind of like they don't have really anything else to focus on other than academics. What I'm curious to hear from you is, how did you, like, the growth mindset? You said you got a 1.8 your first trimester or first quarter, and then did you just flip a switch, or was it kind of like a steady climb uphill? Like, at what point in college did you feel like you had adjusted yourself to the expectations?
I mean, it's almost like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. It's almost like when you start living on your own, paying your own bills, living in your own space, paying for your own rent. it's kind of like, when you're still living with your parents, your parents are like, oh yeah, one day you'll have a house like this. And then, you go out to the city and you get an apartment. It's like literally about the size of a closet, you know, and there's holes in it and there's things crawling around and all this other craziness that prevents you from getting a good night's sleep so that you can then go to a job that doesn't pay well. It's just things that pile upon each other. Um, that's kind of what it felt like in when I was past that first quarter. I turned it into a mindset of damage control. And I know that sounds bad, but it was kind of like, all right, what are the things that I can spend my mental energy on to prevent myself from from falling further down. It was at that point I didn't really think of it as growth. I was being put through the grinder as compared to being put into the soil to grow. So I
Interesting.
think that um in that way, the first 2 years were not really as enlightening as the things that I did in my third and especially my fourth year at UCLA. Those were the years when I started to focus on my major, um, especially once let's see, yeah, I attempted to apply to a major and didn't get that, but that's something I can explain in greater detail later. Um, but yeah, I like the first 2 years of my college experience were almost purely damage control. What can I do
Yeah.
to prevent myself from scoring out of the school that I spent effort getting into? So that's kind of my experience on that. That's kind of how I recall it, at least.
An experience like that can, for my, I had a much different background, and it wasn't as much academic, but I think those types of things can influence your self-image for a long time. Like did it make you feel like, do you talk about how it affected your self-image, or because I think that's part of the growth mindset thing.
I I never really thought about it because like there were so many of my own peers that were it felt like we were all being put through the grinder, especially
Okay.
when uh especially within peers of your own class, like of a particular course. We're all struggling to understand, you know, how a matrix works in the context of what would that be, like pure calculus or something. I don't know, but like
Well,
we were
so
all yeah, we were all being put through the grinder. So we all relatively understood ourselves as, you know, the student that has to study to understand these things to get the grade. And that's kind of what it boiled down to. Um, I think that it almost had a sense of unity amongst all the students who were struggling. But there were personally moments when almost felt like almost culturally that I didn't fit. Not like not that people were rejecting me. It was more that um how do I describe this? So a little bit of background. I grew up in the Excelsior district, not too far from Cat. And my father uh I spent most of my youth with my father. So um he was a man who grew up in the 70s and 80s as a brown immigrant, being how do I say this? Being shit on by people.
yeah.
um, essentially, he had a hard life, but he took none of it. He was very good at letting people know what he thinks, be it verbally or literally in a physical manner. But uh, he wanted me to not be like that, so he spent lots of time with me, um, and parts of his life uh, kind of uh, helped shape me as it would with any other parent. So like he didn't have a particular taste for very expensive things or expensive hobbies. He collected Hot Wheels. Um, he got into baking foods. a little bit later, and like we grew up kind of like uh, low middle class, kind of. We had a house in the Excelsior, we lost it, and it always felt like we were kind of teetering that poverty line, even though numerically we weren't. So like when I arrived in LA and they just kind of let me loose, I'm seeing like I'm seeing the full range of what a student my age would be in terms of socioeconomic status, um, like race and ethnicity, the full gender spectrum as well, and like just having all this stuff that is like things that I would have to understand and perceive. But it was just kind of like, man, what am I doing here? I am just like some I'm just like some kid from San Francisco that that got lucky and played a system. That's kind of how it felt, is that I played a system, but I went way over my head in terms of what I could actually do. Those were always the moments of like self-doubt that was kind of like, man, I have I have 8 more pages of the 12-page paper to write in the next 12 hours, and it's like, shit, what did I sign up for? It's just like I at and it's all momentary. It's kind of like I'll be looking at, I don't know, I'll be looking at groups of friends that all have like the latest iPhone or whatever when I'm just out walking to class, and it's just kind of like, man, these kids must be rich. But then again, this is a particularly high end university. I should expect that. But then it's also like they also happen to be the ones with the 3.5s and not really stressing about it because they just have the mental capacity to do that. And it was just like feeling out of place. There's that feeling of being out of place for quite a while.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. I haven't had it, and I had a different experience, but I think the idea is, I think, um to use my channel to tell more first generation college student stories. Where
Right.
did your dad, you said he's an immigrant from where?
So he is an immigrant from the Philippines.
Okay.
The Filipino side of my family. So I mixed Filipino and Chinese.
Okay.
The Filipino side of my family, they immigrated in the year 1970. Subsequent, like coincidentally, on July 4th. And they grew up. The kids ended up. I have lots of aunts and uncles, so when I'm referring to the kids, I'm referring to them. So the kids all went to when they were going to middle school. It was initially they were going to. There's this middle school in Glen Park that still exists. I believe it's kind of tall and it's got like a baby blue exterior, I believe. And I recall at least my dad going there for some time, and then all of a sudden, the district goes and tells my grandparents, "Oh, your kids are getting transferred to Hunters Point," just out of nowhere, And it was just kind of like that's kind of why my dad was like, um, he didn't really care about what school could do for him. He just knew that it can get him the thing that he wanted. It wasn't necessarily that being educated was good for the self. It was just good for what you can get out of it, which is a very practical mindset. I understand that because that's probably one facet that he transferred upon me, is being very utilitarian with such things. But like uh, when he was going to when him and my uncles were going to high school over in Oceana, there were moments when shop class, when you're actually welding and doing things in a shop, basically like the the instructors there were kind of urging my dad to continue doing the shop stuff instead of potentially taking the prerequisite courses to go to college, because he was actually on par for that. He was on track to do it if he so choose. And it seemed like the instructors and the administration there were kind of nudging him away from that, even though he was kind of like, "Yo, dude, what are you talking about? I could totally do that." But he ended up not doing it. So yeah, long story.
Well, I was curious, what is your view of education? Is it to get you the skill or the degree or whatever it is to put you in a place to have a good job or an opportunity, or is it about learning about yourself, expanding your mind? Is it somewhere in between?
Um, so I will speak of it as the sphere of academia as a whole. Um, in terms of what I think, I feel like a lot of uh, a lot of people go to college for a credential. So some people go to college for a literal skill, say computer engineering, or something that is so specialized that it can only happen in that one environment. But some people are like, yeah, I want to, like, I don't know, get a bachelor's science of geology because I like rocks, and it's like, um, that's good if you're following an interest, or that's good if you know somebody in the field already and they're waiting for you, you know.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like that's kind of where people, at least in my particular class, were kind of headed. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm doing this one major because I I like these things, or I'm doing this one major because my family has connections in the field. Oh, all my family are doctors. I can go over to that same hospital. It could be the whole family, you know. Um, and my situation was completely different. So this leads on to the uh, getting declined from applying to a major, the thing that I had mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so once I survived the first quarter, um, I realized of all the classes there, the one that I liked the most was communication studies. I found it very interesting, because it was almost like an extension of all of the kind of ancillary things that we were taught when we were being taught to do presentations at CAT. It was things like being able to project your voice, what that implies, your tone of voice, uh, hand mannerisms, your posture, the whole communication studies sphere as it related to what was happening in LA was very interesting to me. So I decided to shift my entire curriculum, or rather my whole course set, towards going for the communication studies major. So in LA, there's 7 prerequisite courses. Um, you need to have at least a 3.5 GPA to apply. You need to then fill out an application once you've completed all of them. And then and then basically, like, you can only do it in your sophomore year. So like, out of all 4 of those things, I did the entire thing. My grades weren't sufficient enough, supposedly, and I was declined from it,
Hmm.
despite already having taken some of the upper division courses, in that major, because I found those particular things interesting. And it was just like, well, I was already in so deep, and then to be declined for that without so much as more than from there was my transition to the sociology major. So I was speaking with the counselor of that department, and they were like, "Oh yeah, it's close enough to communication studies." And what ended up happening is I fell completely in love with the whole sociology sphere. not so much the authors of the particular topics, but what it boiled down to essentially. So I was told in sociology courses that um, anything that has to anything that relates between two people or more people is something social, which can be analyzed, and then you can imply or kind of interpret certain things about it. That was the general thing that I learned from that major, and I feel like that's something I found the most valuable from my college experience.
Was the idea of what it means to be so, like what something social is, or what sociology studies?
So it so in the sociology major, we actually covered lots of these social justice type issues. So things like socioeconomic inequity or racial inequality, that those kinds of things. Those were particular analysis topics that made up large curriculums.
Mhm.
And when we were reading about such things, we were required to kind of understand, for example, why Occupy Wall Street happened, both from the individual point of view and also why it would happen on a greater general trend of people, and to be able to kind of explain why that would be. Um,
What,
and like,
and
yeah, go ahead.
I guess I'm curious, I may have an idea in my head of why I've thought of those things happening, but like, can you give a, like, what was it? So it gave you a lens on why Occupy Wall Street happened?
Well, that's one general example, but it gave me a general toolkit to understand why people will feel compelled to uh, kind of act upon specific issues. So in the
Okay.
case of Occupy Wall Street, as the individual yourself, for example, um, you would probably agree that it's messed up for 1% of people to have 99% of wealth, right? And then for it to not be able, for there not to be a system where it's distributed fairly, right? As the individual, you feel like those two core things are pressing enough that if you don't do anything, there will be repercussions to the self, right? And on a greater level, as a group of people who all agree about that particular topic, that ends up becoming the resources you need to act and to make it into the pages of history, where you literally have hundreds or thousands of people crowding around several distinct buildings because they all agree that it's messed up that 1% of people have, whatever the issue may be. So that's something that's like relatively simple, I think.
I'm curious,
Go ahead.
when I think of a lot of the term social justice that you used,
Yeah.
is like too broad. Like, I think that term has lost having any meaning to me, because what we all want justice, but we have seen a lot of things change lately. And Occupy may have been the first like kind of landmark type thing, but then there was the Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, a lot of events involving the murder of Black males. There's Black Lives Matter, and then of course in this past year, Black Lives Matter and the Capitol riots. To me, in addition to sociology, social media, well, maybe not in addition to, social media is a big part in the equation. Did you guys talk about that at all?
So my opinion and kind of as an analysis of social media is that it is an environment where, depending on the platform, you have relative anonymity to not only voice opinions, but also to gather social power. And when I mean social power, I mean the literal power in numbers kind of thing, where if you have X amount of people agreeing with you, then that must be a valid cause, right? Unless, of course, it fundamentally disagrees with something that is about yourself, right? So um, the main thing that I can think of, which I found contradictory to what I said, is the population of Latino and Black American people who had voted for Trump, because he says and does things, or did those things, so heinously aimed at those particular demographics. But then those people who had voted for him um, saw all the ads, getting blasted with ads, and all the people that were telling uh, kind of the false promises about what President Trump would have been able to do, and they were kind of swayed and voted in his favor. And that's something that I find very I find it, I don't want to say it's interesting, like it is interesting only in that it's like contradictory, right? You would kind of imagine that if there is a person that is aiming that's either aiming threats or aiming consequences at you, that you would not want to vote that person into power. But then I must be missing something here if they happen to have done that. So that's something I found interesting in the social media kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's contradictory with the dominant narrative, but I do think what I've noticed is that there's people of every single race and ethnicity that like Trump, and there's people of every ethnicity that are kind of anti-immigrant too.
Let's see.
And I think that that's just something that doesn't get into the mainstream often. But yeah, I mean, I kind of think he's a little bit like I don't know if this is unfair to say this being recorded, but like we idolize Scarface, we idolize like gangsters, right? And I mean, like gangsters are just somebody that don't feel like the rules apply to them and they gain power.
Yeah. And yeah, that kind of reminds me of like how my dad always told me that the police are the world's largest gang because they get to enforce what they think are the rules, and crucially what it is they think are, right? Because they're not sitting there with the booklet, they don't have the full thing that the lawyer carries around. So so yeah, that's something I keep in the back of my mind all the time when I'm just walking around. If I'm just enjoying my day by myself, I always think of it like the people cruising around in cars that happen to have firearms that are looking at you. Are they any different from an organized any kind of organized thing with some power that could probably put your face in? That's always something I keep in mind. Even though I personally have never been really personally threatened or confronted in any way that I would consider in a racist fashion or in any kind of like overtly oppressive fashion. I know that it does happen, in very unfortunate and very unfair manners.
Yeah. Well, that stuff is I find that stuff kind of troubling. Some of those topics troubling, but I also do find it interesting from the kind of like, where are we at now? How's that changed so quick? What role does social media play? I do think that social media has given voice to a lot of people who had been marginalized throughout our history. I do think a lot of times when we have the most change is because of a technological advance, like in the 60s, I think the automobile and the color television were two parts of the equation that don't often get added to the mix. And I think we're in a time that things have fundamentally changed in this last year where social media given everybody a platform to kind of communicate their opinion via text. And our communication skills have corroded a little bit. Like, I think we've lost the ability to have a disagreement with somebody that has a different belief set than us.
I certainly, yes, I certainly agree with your statement there that there's some people's ability to explain something has eroded in that some if you're using Facebook, you can just post a picture of what this is, right? Or you can just quote somebody else, or you can just use an emoji. I don't ever use emojis. I don't really know. I don't feel like it would feel disingenuous to be using an emoji in my own personal feel. And like it's I certainly agree with that, especially coming from a place like Cat where verbal communication was very important. It was certainly that's something that I do appreciate about Cat is that it gave me not only the confidence but also like the raw skills to be able to explain something to someone or have a conversation and potentially a disagreement, you know, because that there is a way of saying that I disagree with you without it exploding, but people perhaps take things a little bit too personally. That's kind of what I feel social media has done.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I could talk about this stuff a lot with you. I don't know if you have other topics you want to go to. I think one thing I notice is that the schools I taught at in Oakland and San Francisco are better at teaching certain skills that schools are bad at measuring, which is confrontation, which is giving and receiving feedback, standing in front of an audience, just being comfortable with who you are, knowing who you are, and also like this multicultural thing, like meeting somebody that comes from a different background and wanting to learn about that background, are things that are not always conditioned in the suburbs, I think. And so I think part of it, maybe people being, like you say, sensitive, but I also think that people come from an environment that is normalized in all our media and don't understand that they have a culture. And that triggers a lot of incidents. A lot of things that we're dealing with today, I think, involves that too.
Okay, so in my personal experience, when I scroll through something like Facebook, um, it's very my friend group happens to be very homogenous. Um, Lots and lots of people will find all of the same things off-putting, or all of the same things very worthy of celebration, or worthy of remembrance, or worthy of action. Um, and like in that way, I have really disengaged with Facebook. It has become something for my eyes to look at as compared to a means for me to engage with other people. An example of this is that just for fun, one of my friends invited me to a meme page about transportation. And I was like, oh, it's probably just going to be like funny things, you know, like silly images with weird text and weird faces. And what it is it's someone will post something interesting or cool or not cool or like weird, and then like 4 or 5 different facets of people will all assault each other in the comments, creating 300 comments, and then the mods have to shut it down. And then someone posts another post that's something like that, and then it continues, and it's just this endless cycle of everybody trying to kill each other through words. And I'm just like, I don't have the mental capacity for that. I can't. I'd rather be arguing with a person in front of me. You know?
Yeah, that's what I think is I think everybody kind of wants to argue, to be honest, and I don't think we want to do it through our fingertips. Like, I think we want to do it. That's where I don't know if this is just a mistake or if this is like an something by design, but I think we would be able to be more unified as a country if we had social media that gave us the opportunity to talk to people and argue. Like maybe there was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly how that would look.
I Okay, so I don't agree with that more because I have very little confidence that anything using the internet that isn't heavily monitored in some way to make sure people aren't trying to just ruin it. I have a feeling that no matter how hard you attempt to use a platform that is essentially public access on the internet, um, no matter how hard you try, it's gonna end up becoming either strange, obscene, or just like a fire pit. So like that's kind of my take on it. Because it's like we've lost sense of the like the town hall kind of meeting. You know, people that are close to you people that are literally close to you, like in your locality, discussing a common topic or concern. Um, because you're literally neighbors. I feel like we've lost kind of sense of that, which makes sense in the COVID kind of environment. But even before that, it was kind of like, um, well, like when I was living in the Excelsior, I remember my neighbors fairly well. But then, like when we moved out and I moved into Mission, we don't have neighbors. We have tower blocks, not tower blocks, but like apartment buildings. There's no faces. There's no one to say hi to. So it's kind of like, um, I feel like social media has given us like the illusion that you are being connected with the other person or a group of people, but it doesn't allow you to look them in the eye and say, I don't believe you're right just because you happen to be next to me, or of the same ethnicity, or of my family. you know
And it's dehumanizing.
yeah,
And we've, I think when we're not careful, we start to forget who somebody is, what their experiences are, what their background is, and we see them for what they believe or how they vote or something like that. And I think that a little bit is unfortunate, toxic, maybe. Um,
yeah.
how about, here's one thing I don't know that I see talked about enough, is like the intergenerational, or like, what are you, Gen Z? Do
I
you talk to do you talk to your elders, your parents, grandparents, or like, is there a lot of communication that goes on between people that are in different age brackets?
Well, first off, I don't know if I'm Generation Z or Z. Um, I was born in 1996, but I seem to both act uh like an old man from the 70s, and also like like a modern hip kid or something, in a mix of the two. Um, but
I see
like,
that.
oh man, I forgot the question. Sorry, can you repeat that?
Well, I'm just curious how much, like I think this is a big story, is that if you look at millennials, they have their own worldview. If you look at boomers, they have their worldview. Gen Xers, Gen Zers, they all have their own worldview. And
Right.
they don't ever, they come to table and say, this is where we agree, this is where we differ. They've just got ways of dismissing each other.
I think, like, at least in particular with like a baby boomer bracket, for example. My dad loves to argue that he knows more about driving than I do because he's older than me and he's been driving for longer. Even though I have for the last 6 years been riding a bicycle out on the road, and you need to adhere to all the same road laws. I know where I'm supposed to signal. I know how many seconds the yellow light is supposed to be and what you're supposed to do in that situation. You know, and like he refuses to listen because he's older than me. The seniority case, which uh, very much contradicts my logic mindset. I don't like that because I feel like anyone can contribute unless something conflicts. And if something conflicts, you prove it. You don't try to explain it away. Like if for example, let's say, what is this made of, right? What would you say this is made of?
Soda water. Oh, aluminum.
Yes. So aluminum. And if I said, no, this is made of steel, and then you say, okay, go and crush it with your bare hand, and I crush it, then I am proven wrong, right? I am proven wrong with something that can literally be shown to somebody. And I feel like, back to the kind of social media thing, the era of social media has meant that you have to explain everything through words. And like, you can't pick up the can and prove that it's made of aluminum over the internet unless you're doing something like this, which is about as close as we can get to excuse me, which is about as close as we can get to some sort of like real discourse, like a one-on-one meeting. I feel like social media trying to, especially with something as intangible as like a political mindset, or like how a certain policy is in fact a racist one, attempting to explain something intangible like that, especially over the internet, is like almost impossible, I think, because like unless you have a set of books and have access to all the text, you can then at least present a reasonable case for a perspective on this racist legislature, but you cannot prove it like you can with the aluminum can. And like, because of that, I have found that I just don't engage with those kinds of things. I just don't even bother. I exist. I can eat food. I can wear whatever clothes I want. I can afford rent. My life has boiled down to be very simple. I trust you about as close as I would let you stand. And if I don't like what you're doing, I will keep a weapon ready. It's not. I like to keep it simple, like, and like, people are kind of astounded that like I can go from being so nice to certain people and so very angry with other people out in the world. It's almost entirely down to what they're doing at the moment. This comes from when I'm cycling, for example. If someone's cutting me off, I'll go up next to their window and give it a tap. Something that I don't condone, but I do that in the moment because that's what my mind thinks is appropriate to get their attention. But then like if I'm like, I don't know, asking the teller at some business, oh, so what do you recommend from this menu? I'm very polite in doing that because, for one, I need information from them, and two, it would be counterproductive to do it a different way. And like, I feel like, nobody can tell when you're screaming when on the internet. No one can tell when you're trying to be nice. And like, that's why like my preferred form of communication is messenger, and then Zoom, and then in person, or like, over the window, through the window, kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say about that.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting stuff to me. And I guess the last thing I would say on that, because I've messed around with some internet message boards, argued about this and that, and if you have a trigger, somebody is going to find it on the message boards. So if there's one thing, you can always sit with whatever your triggers are and try to figure out where your anger is coming from. What about, do you keep in touch with classmates?
Yeah, well, I have a small group of people that I keep in contact with. It's mostly It's mostly Kelsey Joe and Laura
Okay.
Muehlbauer. Um, once in a while, I'll talk to Chloe Rodriguez
Okay.
and Carlos Montejano. Um, and hmm, not very many other people. Those are the main people that I communicate with. Me and Lawrence Ling, though, we both attended UCLA,
Mhm.
and miraculously, we both survived the 3-quarter Tagalog foreign language course. We both did that, even though neither
Uh-huh.
of us took it. But I believe he is living a good life in Colorado.
Interesting. I think I saw something on Facebook.
Yeah.
When you said Kelsey Joe, it reminded me that she was in my class one time, not when I was preparing for class, and she told me to listen to Vampire Weekend. And I love Vampire Weekend. I don't know why she told me to, but I still remember she gave me that recommendation, and that
I
band is
see.
fire. Hmm?
Interesting. I don't know. I don't know what that is.
Well,
It's just-
tell her I appreciate that recommendation. I still
yes,
listen to them.
I will most assuredly let her know. Given she remembers that.
Yeah, I doubt she will, but she might be. But tell them if they want to do one of these things, and it's fun for me. And
Yeah.
I assume that this is going to go viral. So who do you want to shout out anybody or thank anybody or
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like, thank you for giving me this opportunity to kind of just speak, because I don't really get to do this in a semi-formal setting anymore. I'm usually talking one-on-one with people, like, privately, or since obviously I don't prefer to use the greater internet to speak, you know. But let me actually get a book real quick. Where did it go? Yes, before we end today.
Mhm.
So here's a weird story. So in that weird gray period between me graduating and coming home from LA and when I actually got a real job, um, I was just kind of like in limbo. I was kind of stuck. But I was still in this particularly jaded mindset about college. I had been put so deep through the grinder that like my I was worried about being able to finish my final exam paper whilst I was walking on stage and getting my fake diploma. That was still
Mhm.
in my mind. um, but once those feelings kind of settled, I decided to go into a bookstore and spend money on a book, which is very surprising. And I went to Green Apple Books, I believe. It's some similar name. I believe they're on Clement. It's a classic bookstore. It's multi-story, and they have all sorts of fields. And of all the things I picked something from the field of sociology. This is
What? Okay. The web of
conflict.
group
In the,
affiliations.
yes, conflict in the web of group affiliations. I feel like I can flip to almost anything in this book, and it'll probably relate to some sort of modern topic. Um, let's see. Let me find a. Let's see. Let's see. A topic on compromise. I am quoting from the book. In sharp contrast to the termination of conflict through victory, is its end in compromise. Would you not agree with that?
I'm not an auditory learner, so sometimes it helps. Can you read it one more time?
In sharp contrast to the termination of conflict through victory, is its end in compromise.
So it's saying the victory is an end of compromise because there's
Victory is an end to conflict in the
uh-huh.
same way that turning the light switch is the way you turn the light off. But the other means by which you can end conflict is in compromise.
Yeah, I guess I think of it like in this book I've been reading right here is called Metaphors We Live By.
Yeah.
And they talk about the idea of a conversation. Is it an argument, like, or an argument is like a battle or a war, or is it
Mhm.
like a dance? Right. And I think a dance is more of a compromise. A war,
Yeah.
or a battle is more an argument, is more of one that ends in victory or defeat. And
Yeah.
I like the dance more than the battle.
Yeah. The dance is good. And like, and as strange as this sounds, I I have become quite robotic, especially coming from uh, what I kind of do, not do for a living, but kind of how I interact in my workplace. Become very robotic. It's almost like I prefer uh, instead of instead of the battle and then the dance, you can also add a third one. It's like, just sending the letter. You know, just sending the
Mhm.
letter. It's right there. You don't have to. There's no craziness about the words. The words are there. You just got to open it up and read it, and then you can figure it out from there. I prefer that, and like not so much as like I don't want to listen to people. I just want to know what they're thinking, or I want to know how they feel about a thing, or I want to help them through a situation. Um, and like, I feel like, I guess, pertaining to my sociology degree, the specializing, or rather the thing I found the most interest in, is like uh interpersonal relations, one-on-one or one and group, how they relate and how they conflict and how they find themselves attractive or whatever. That is the thing that I find most interesting. So yes, I do enjoy discourse like this. It's kind of
Well, I'd
my
like
thing.
to do it again. Did you say what you're doing for work?
It What I'm doing for work has nothing to do with sociology, but that we could probably go about that another time.
All right. Well, yeah, let's maybe do it again. I appreciate you for coming on and doing this. And I really do think that what you started with is a message that needs to get communicated. I think is I feel bad that we put you in that place of conflict. I feel like going forward, you're going to learn from overcoming that conflict, like, quite a bit. About that made you aware of who you are, and who you are as somebody that's going to stand up and get to action. But it
Yeah,
is unfortunate that we have a system that um, forces you into that like that situation.
yeah, I agree.
All right, thanks, Cres.
Hmm.
All right, welcome, Cres. Thanks for volunteering to talk to me.
Of
I
course.
often when I interviewed Regina, I asked her, what do actors do to, like, get the butterflies out before they go on stage? And
Hmm.
she said they make a lion face and then a lemon face. So you can join me in making a lion, like,
Right. I don't do that. Sadly.
okay.